Marvellous. So we're just thinking at the beginning about this section of scripture where God remembered Noah. And that doesn't mean that the all-knowing God had no idea what was going on with Noah up until then. And then he's scratching his head and then he goes, I'm going to remember Noah. Someone I was listening to said this means he's renewing relationship with Noah. He's going, I'm going to reach out to Noah again. Because it's not that Noah is forgotten in the ark. And it's not that he's somewhere where he's not meant to be either. God told him to build this ark and Noah has faithfully gone into the ark. But we've got this moment where God remembered Noah. And the person I was listening to said, the closest we might get to it is maybe at Christmas we think, I must remember so-and-so. I must remember them in my Christmas list. And by that we mean, we must reach out to them again. We must write them a card or send them a present, give them a call. That's what we're thinking of here with God remembered Noah. God's going to reach out afresh to Noah again. There's going to be something new happening. God has been with Noah in the ark. He's meant to be in the ark, kept safe. But Noah has been in this ark for over a year. This is a long time to be in a wooden ship, getting battered by the waves and then coming to rest on a mountain. This is a long time to be kept safe. And even if you're being kept safe, it still might not feel very good. It might feel dark and dingy with only one window and that being covered, it seems, maybe, by this covering. It might be a bit smelly, surrounded by these animals. So God remembered Noah and all the wild animals and the livestock that were with him in the ark. God cares for these creatures, all of them that are present on this floating Eden, this floating temple place, this floating sanctuary that is brimming with life and that looks a lot like the early chapters of Genesis in terms of Adam and Eve. On the 17th day of the 7th month, the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. Now he's going to have some firm ground underneath him. So you remember last time I was speaking on Noah, we were doing those swords and we were thinking about God being the safe place in our travels, right? That God goes with us like the shepherd. And the ark has been floating around, moving from place to place, keeping him safe. But now they're going to have a fixed place. The ark is going to come to rest. And God, who's been with them in all their travels as the ark's been floating along, will be there on the mountains. And I'm told that the 17th day of the 7th month, as the Hebrew calendar got changed, ends up being the first month, for one thing. I'm told this is the day when Jesus was risen from the dead in the calendar. So there's some significance here. The ark's come to rest. And we can look back and think, Jesus, in one sense, came to rest. He was in the tomb, but he didn't rest in the tomb, did he? Not in one sense. He didn't stop there, is what I mean. He didn't just stay dead. No, he got up. He got up and he returned to his disciples with victory. And this ark has done what it was meant to achieve. It took the flood. It took the storm. It kept those who trusted in it alive. And Jesus does the same for us. He takes the storm. He weathers all the wrath of God in order to keep those alive who trust in him. And resurrection happens. So there's preservation, and then there's a calling to go out. So we see that God said to Noah, come out. And God has calls for us today in a similar fashion. He doesn't just call for us to be cooped up in church or cooped up safe. Christians often get called into Jesus, and there's something different that happens then. But they also get called to go out again. So he's been kept safe in the ark, but now he's got to go out into all the world and be the people that God is calling him and his family to be. So God said to Noah, this is the sign of the covenant I've established between me and all life on the earth. So we're going to look at a couple of ideas before we then sing and then head into communion. So in this section, we see the ideas coming forward of sacrifice, of covenant blessing. And we are told very explicitly, God will remember. So when we think God has forgotten, we are told very explicitly in this that God will remember. And we can see ahead and think ahead to other things that God will remember. So we see sacrifice at the beginning of this chapter. Very first thing that Noah did when he came out of that ark, it wasn't to build himself a home, it was to build an altar. This is the entryway into this new earth, this new land that is happening. Noah built an altar to the Lord, and taking some of all the clean animals and clean birds, he sacrificed burnt offerings on it. So the point of living on that earth was not sacrifice, it was that they could go forth and live and build a life. But still, in a sense, the gateway into that life was sacrifice. Was he acknowledged what God had done, and he wanted to present this sacrifice. And we can think about how he's done it in Jesus. That we're told Jesus is presented like a shepherd, and one in whom we will go out and come in and find pasture. Right? So the point of Jesus' sacrifice is the entry into life. There is a rich, full plethora of life in Christ and in God. But the entryway into that, the doorway, is Jesus and his sacrifice. He is the door. And so, when Noah comes out the door, one of the first things he does is sacrifice. Let's build this altar, worship God. That's the beginning. Curiously, it says clean animals. And I only really noticed this the other day, because it hasn't been laid out yet in the Old Testament law what makes a clean animal and what makes an unclean animal. But presumably, they had some idea. I'm not sure that God necessarily spelled it out to Noah exactly what's a clean animal and what's an unclean animal, but maybe he did. It doesn't say. But somehow Noah knew. Maybe they had the right idea about what would be good for food and what wouldn't be good for food from observing the animals. And thinking, oh, those sheep, those appear very clean, don't they? They seem useful. They seem helpful to us. But those pigs, they don't seem like they're going to be very clean. They just act in a way that specifies uncleanness. But whatever it was, and I think maybe Noah had the idea of what was best and what was useful. At the very least, that is helpful for us when we think about sacrifice. Because we don't sacrifice something that's not useful, do we? It wouldn't be a sacrifice. We don't sacrifice something that's not going to be a gain to keep. But we say it's a gain to lose because we're giving it to the other. We're giving it to the person. We're giving it to God. So I think there's something in cleanness where Noah's offering the best. Noah's offering what's useful, what's helpful. And he's going, God, I'm going to offer this to you. It'd be good if I could keep it, but actually in friendship, I'm offering it to you. So we might think along those lines, what do we offer God? Because it's sacrifice if it's useful. And we know that we've been offered the best of sacrifices in Jesus. That he was that pleasing aroma. He was really the one before God that makes all things well. Where we can trust in him and know that he's offered him himself, the most useful, the best of all possible sacrifices. That we could be free, that we could be clean, that we could be made well and restored before God. So this leads to covenant and blessing. Now, covenant is not quite the same as making a deal, because God initiates a covenant and we can say yes or no. But it's not quite the same as making a deal because we can't start altering the terms. Something that I thought was a bit pointless about me being sent various contracts recently from my housing society people is that there's rafts of information. But at the top of this information that I've got to read through and presumably understand, it says things like, this can't be changed. It's a take it or leave it deal, right? You take it or you leave it. And the covenant with God is largely like that. God says, I will do this. These are the blessings I give. It's a take it or leave it deal. We're the minor partners in this, but it's such a good deal. We wouldn't want to alter it. We wouldn't want to put in our own words. Such a good deal is this covenant. And the covenant is based on this. The Lord smelled the pleasing aroma, by which actually eternally he knows what Christ will do. He knows that Christ will come and save and be the pleasing aroma. And said in his heart, never again will I curse the ground because of humans. It's not going to get worse and worse and worse on the earth because of what they're doing, even though it could. Even though every inclination of the human heart is evil from childhood. That's the basis of the covenant. They're evil. They're doing evil. It's not based on maybe they'll get better. If they just do a bit more, if they just do a bit better. The basis is it's got to be on God's own goodness, because they won't earn it, they won't achieve it. This is such a wonderful covenant. I read recently a book by Viktor Frankl, who's an Australian neurologist, psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor. He wrote a very prominent book called Man's Search for Meaning, which is a really fascinating account of camp life, because he went to various concentration camps and work camps, and he was often there as a camp doctor, but he wrote this account of his experiences in the camp. Here's one I found interesting, that as the inner life of the prisoner tended to become more intense, he also experienced the beauty of art and nature as never before. Under their influence, he sometimes even forgot his own frightful circumstances. If someone had seen our faces on the journey from Auschwitz to the Bavarian camp as we beheld the mountains of Salzburg, with their summits glowing in the sunset, through the little barred windows of the prison carriage, he would never have believed that those were the faces of men who had given up all hope of life and liberty. A number of parts of the book, I'll say, before and after this, are very distressing in terms of what he went through and what he witnessed. One evening, when we were already resting on the floor of our hut, dead tired, soup bowls in hand, a fellow prisoner rushed in and asked us to run out to the assembly grounds and see the wonderful sunset. I think this was a munitions camp of some kind. So it wasn't, in one sense, a wonderful setting. This was a place where people were being starved and killed, and also where, close by, I think, was the factory that was making munitions. So it was an engine of death, in many senses. Standing outside, we saw sinister clouds glowing in the west, and the whole sky alive with clouds of ever-changing shapes and colours. From steel blue to blood red, the desolate grey mud huts provided a sharp contrast, while the puddles on the muddy ground reflected the glowing sky. Then, after minutes of moving silence, one prisoner said to another, "How beautiful the world could be." So in the midst of that tragedy, they can still look around and see the handiwork of the Creator God. And I think for the story of Noah, we should remember this, that when God looks out and sees people who have been killing each other, who have been brutal, and he decides to send the flood to wash them away, God still remembers and thinks, how beautiful the world could be. And stronger than that, how beautiful the world will be. He knows what he's making. He knows the end to which he's going. And he bases it in his own character. The Lord smelled the pleasing aroma, and he looks ahead and he knows the pleasing aroma that Christ will be. And says in his heart, never again will I curse the ground because of humans. He's not going to make the ground a curse even more than it was. So there's covenant blessings. God blessed Noah and his sons, saying to them, be fruitful and increase in number and fill the earth. But there's still this rift. This is a tragedy of the story of Noah, that there's a cut between the people and the earth. The people were taken from the ground, but there's this rift, and this rift extends to the animals as well. And he says, the fear and dread of you will fall on all the beasts. So no longer like Adam, who can just name the animals and they'll come to him, or Noah even, who the animals came to. God says it's not going to be like that. The animals are going to run away from you for their own protection. They're going to be afraid of you. How many of you have known an occasion when, I don't know if it's just me, I don't think it is, where you want to stroke an animal? There's a wild animal about and you want to pet it, right? You want to entice it into your garden if it's a bird or something, right? You really want it to come over. Maybe you get quite close and then at the last minute it's afraid of you and it runs away and you go, I mean no harm. I don't want to hurt you, but God says this. He knows what people are like. And so he gives protection to the animals in the form of fear. Fear and dread of you. And this is a sharp divide from what it was meant to be and what it will be and what it was. Even the animals will show. But God will remember. When I bring my clouds over the earth and the rainbow appears in the cloud, I will remember my covenant between me and all living creatures, he says. This covenant extends to all the living creatures of every kind. Whenever the rainbow appears in the cloud, I will see it and remember. Now notice that says what God will do. He doesn't say when you see the rainbow, you will see it and remember, but we can do that as well. He bothers to tell us so we can do it too. But God says, I will see it and remember. I will see the rainbow. And you remember the rainbow is actually all around, isn't it? It's a ring. So it's like God's wedding ring, in a sense. He will remember forwards. He will remember backwards to Noah, but will also remember forwards, which is now backwards, to Jesus. And he'll remember forwards to Jesus coming again as the husband of the church, restoring, rescuing. And a rainbow's not random. It says in Revelation about God that around God there's a rainbow. It says a rainbow that shone like an emerald encircled the throne. So it's not there's just occasionally there's a rainbow and God will see it and remember. He's surrounded by a rainbow. He's got his ring on all the time to remember his people and all living creatures on this earth. So God will not forget his people. Let's remember God